Hello, everybody in YouTube and in Zoom. We are back with the India Writes Back series of interactive talks with writers. Today's guest is Mr. Arjun Rajendran. He is one of the promising poets of the new generation Indian poets. And I have been reading his poetry. I have also shared some of his poems with some of you. They are fabulous poems. I would say poetry of reinvention, as other people have also commented on Arjun's poetry. I was thinking then that all poetry is reinvention, reinvention of the past, of the self, of culture. And all poetry is about imperfection, all poetry is about becoming. So Arjun Rajendran's poems fit into this category of poems, the very contemporary poems that are experimental, that bring together the past, his own personal memories, politics, and an experimental technique sometimes very brilliantly. Again, as I was looking at reading Arjun Rajendran's poems, I saw that his first book was called Snake Wine. I did not get to read poems from that book. I read other poems. But then, when I got to know his poems better, I found that snake wine is a very good metaphor for his poetry as well, where you infuse the past and memories and monstrosities into beautiful poetry, the everyday life also. As you have seen from the introduction we shared on Arjun, he writes about a lot of popular culture also, aspects of popular culture. Sometimes he mentions Tintin or Snowy or Indrajal comics. I looked for Amar Chitrakatha, but I didn't see any poem. Maybe there are. This is also a very unique contemporary technique, as many of us students of English literature know. We have authors like Donald Barthelme who write about Batman and Snowman. And then before I tell you more, I don't want to tell you more about his poetry. We all want Arjun himself to talk, but I would like to bring to your attention two lines from his poetry, more than two lines, that actually define his poetry. In a poem that I came across called Refilling, where he talks about people in the past refilling water in bottles at railway stations. We don't do that anymore because of globalization and water appearing in packaged bottles, packaged water appearing in bottles. So there, in the poem Retelling, Arjun says, I always carry a bottle inside me. I keep refilling it with memories from taps I often forget to close. I thought that's a beautiful way of summarizing his own work. And there's another beautiful poem called Prodigy, where he tricked his mother, maybe, or some female relative. It's the poem Prodigy, where he is the lady is thinking that the child is a prodigy, but because he solved the Rubik's Cube puzzle, but what he actually did was to peel and rearrange the stickers on the Rubik's Cube. I think all poets, all writers, all artists are, like Arjun says, someone who withdraws into himself for hours to peel away anything that can be disguised as language. We all put together existing reality in new ways, and that becomes a totally new, unique picture. So here we have with us Mr. Anand Haridas. We know him from the series of talks we had with filmmakers and film personalities. Anand is leading this discussion and conversation with Arjun. So Anand is a senior media person and a writer, script writer. It's a great pleasure to welcome Anand and Arjun to this session, and also each and every one of you who is listening to us. Over to you, Anand.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyani. Arjun, once again, welcome. So when I start this conversation, let me tell you right at the outset that I am overwhelmed by the range of ideas that you bring into poetry, from very intense personal memories to mundane subjects like beetroot, or from profound history to Tintin and Snowy. To start the conversation, can you tell us more about this process, right from getting inspired by an idea and developing that into a full-fledged form?
Yeah, thank you, Kalyani, and thank you, Anand. Delighted to be here. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So the process, as you put it. Okay, so so I have three full-length collections in a chapbook. Like Kalyani mentioned, my first is Snake Wine, the second is The Cosmonaut and RJ's Rocket, and the third is One Man, Two Executions. So of course, Snake Wine took the longest time. It was my first collection. I was quite unsure, gathering that together. And I have been perhaps more vulnerable and less experimental in Snake Wine than in other collections. I think one of the poems in Snake Wine was called Pyre, in which that's sort of a milestone poem for me personally, because initially I wrote the first draft of the poem in the year 2000, and in 2012, I had reworked the poem many times, but in 2012 I came out with the final version of it, which is it's a short poem. I think 10 lines, if I'm not mistaken. So but it just the structure just fell together, and that's when I realized what you can how memory operates, and how I myself approach memory. It was a learning lesson for me, and I call it a milestone poem because I'd like to talk about how that poem arrived, right? When I was in school in Tamil Nadu for a year, and we were playing on the playground, and just opposite the playground there was actually a body being burnt, and the smoke from the fire, it was just billowing above our heads, and that imagery was so powerful. On the one hand, these kids just playing wantonly without any care, and then this very macabre event happening just outside, and I wanted to give that some voice. I wanted to put that on paper, and my initial version was a bit exotic, a bit ornate. It talked about a Bharatanatyam dancer within the smoke, within the smoke, and all of that, and there was a spiritual angle to it. But I was not pleased with it at all. Then finally I came up with this very succinct version of how close that experience was to my mind and to my being, and it just came through, and structure. That's when I understood that structure and imagery play an important role. It's not just how you feel and what you feel. It's also how you put it on paper, how you structure it. The words you use, whether you want to choose a minimalistic approach, what do you choose to leave out, what do you choose to say in a poem, all that came together for me. So that poem Pyre was very important for me. So that's one poem which was just to talk about process. Then of course then in my second book I have been much more playful. I have had a lot of fun because I grew up, there's a lot of kids, I don't know if kids these days read Tintin as much as we did, but growing up with Tintin and Asterix and all of that, and I grew up in Ernakulam, which is also very instrumental to several of my poems. That particular house I grew up in behind the backwaters. Growing up with my father used to work in an island called Ambalamedu, where it was a sanctuary for animals. So he used to bring all these abandoned baby orphaned animals home, mongoose and parrots and crows and all. And I growing up with all of that. I have tried to give that a voice too in my work and my poems. So yeah, I remember, reading Tintin in that house, and so Tintin was a conduit for me to explore channel these memories, to use this, because Tintin himself Tintin's stories are very adventurous, traveling around the world and all of that. So that's how most of those poems came about, and yeah, I could talk more about other poems if I mean later on, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So your third book is One Man, Two Execution, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of those who are listening, this book is based on diaries of Ananda Rangapillai, the Dubashi or interpreter of the French governor at the fag end of the French colonial rule. And I have read somewhere that it took 3 years for you to complete this book. As you sifted through these historical documents, you went all the way to meet Ananda Rangapillai's descendants. You visited the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich. This is basically you created a poem, a body of work, a poetic work out of a memoir or a official record, which contain very ordinary, official, dry details of ships coming in, the ways that the ships were brought in. So how did that idea of a poetry or a poetic work uh, came out of a history, a piece of history, a real history? And more interestingly, how did the idea so disconnected blend into a single entity? Because I have read some excerpts of this work, and it's so beautiful, and how you have conjured that imagery out of the text, the manual or the entries by Ananda Rangapillai. So, can you explain that process, please?
Yeah, certainly. So the idea itself, the very idea that such text exists, right? That gives us a window into 18th century. That was introduced to me by my father. He said that there's somebody who's written all these diaries, and maybe you can do something with it. And at the time, I was dabbling with maybe writing a novel, writing a short story, and I kept this project aside because I was working on my second book and all of that. And when I finished my second book, I thought, okay, let me look at this, let me see what this is. And I was just astounded that there are 12 volumes. And there's just so much of detail about the 18th century Coromandel, all these different powers, the British, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Mughals, and nothing has been written about it at all. There's this gold mine of information, of data, and nothing. Maybe some Tamil writers have written stories about it, but nothing at all that's in the limelight, or nothing that's well known, nothing in English. So I thought, yeah, why not? Let me try approaching this first of all. And I started reading the diaries, and the first diary is actually the most interesting of all the 12. It contains, like just when you enter the diaries itself, there's something that there's a mention of a deserter, someone who deserted the French army being executed publicly, and that became my starting poem to get into it. I thought, let me attempt a poem on this, and the poem just came through very smoothly. I thought. And that's when I decided that I need to have a maritime approach to this book, because there's so many mentions of ships here, the Duke d'Orléans, this and that, such beautiful names, French names, English names, all of these ships coming into the Pondicherry harbor, going to Mauritius, going to the Mascareign Islands, going to Batavia, all these places whose names have changed, bringing all these exotic goods. And in a way, Ananda Rangapillai is narrating his diary through these ships. So I thought of, this first instance of this execution. I thought of how it will be for a sailor approaching the land to witness his execution from his perspective. And it's called Execution of a Deserter. That's the first poem in the book. And the others, yeah, as I was sifting through this material, I was taking down notes wherever I found, something interesting, something that sounded. And I'm particularly interested in astronomy and space and all of that. That's physics is a deep interest for me. So there was this mention of this great comet called Chezeau's comet, which was seen all around the world. It was seen in France, and there's illustrations of it online too. So again, but the thing is, when you look at this, these are just footnotes or barely, paragraph in these diaries. So how do you transform that into something creative? How do you transform that into a poem? That's the great challenge of this particular collection of work. So for me, each one, I had to personalize it. I had to act as if I am in that period. How would I react to someone looking at that comet over the skies of Pondicherry? And how would it be if I were alive and witnessing it right there? So it's actually like taking a time machine and going there. And I had to keep a few things in mind. First of all, the language. The language cannot be contemporary. It cannot. I cannot afford anachronisms. I cannot use certain idioms which you use in modern usage. So that has to be the historical authenticity has to be preserved. And for that, again, the Anandra Kapila uses certain vocabulary, and then there are certain words that are used throughout. For certain objects, correct? Like bills of lading, and these are all terms. These are specific technical terms which have to do with that period. And using these would lend more authenticity to the works, and I've done that throughout. I also made a decision not to explain this anywhere sometimes people explain it at the bottom of the poems, in footnotes, or at the back there's a glossary. I've not provided anything at all. I thought that if the reader is willing enough, the poem can be accessible, and this vocabulary should not be a hindrance. So that was one crucial decision I made. And there are other poems like Marie Gertrude, where there's actually a historical mystery, a sort of a riddle which is buried in those pages. And I had to. It was so to me. Marie Gertrude was a ship. So my task was, as a poet, as a writer, my task was to salvage that ship, to bring it back again, to float it again. And what was so interesting about this particular ship, for instance, was that the name was changed from the original name was Kizarmir. The original name was Marie Gertrude. It was a French name. It was changed to Kizarmir Ahmad because the British and French were at war. So if it were a Muslim ship, Muslim, not a ship particularly, I think a schooner or something smaller than that, it would escape the notice. So it was actually disguising itself. It was act of camouflage, which we see in the 18th century. Very, very interesting account of how they managed to escape the attention of the British. So these, that's part of how I got to these poems. So each poem in that book is different, and there are 3 sections. Only the first section is the Pondicherry. The second section is a little more, it's more personal, and the third one is again a collection of various poems written the past 5 years. So but
And probably you can also give an idea about the title also, One Man, Two Execution. So that also is very interesting because it's about officially executing a person twice.
Right. Yeah. So there used to be a custom back then. So that if a prisoner, someone is condemned to a hanging, if the noose breaks, the person is pardoned. But then the priest over there, he comes and says, no, hang him again. So they overlook this custom for some reason. He's not pardoned and he is hung again. So
that happened with the deserter.
No, this is somebody else. I'm not sure if he was a deserter or if he was a pirate, or I'm not really sure right now, but maybe that's not mentioned. But no, this was not the deserter. This was somebody else. Yeah.
So that struck you as a metaphor of the challenges that we face in life, where the pardon, that pardon that we all earn for is not there. It's not there. So you have to go through the ordeal again.
It did not really strike me directly as a metaphor like that, but it was just the absurdity of the whole situation. That that someone who's how can someone be executed twice? That itself is that's an oxymoron. That's not something that's possible. Correct? I mean, that's an absurdity right there. And I'm fascinated by absurdities. I like to encapsulate absurdities in my work and try to give them a voice. So this I think this title spoke most to that absurdity of perhaps the human condition of existence.
Okay. At the same time, another aspect that I noticed in your poetry is the intensity of memories, that the material that you draw from your memories, personal memories. One of your poem itself says, "My memory, unlike supermarket vegetables, isn't lacking in flavor." So you find enough material for your poetry from your memories. especially the poems that you have written on your mother. They are very intense and very, what do you call, touching. At the same time, what I would like to know is whether those transformation of personal memories, very personal, intense memories into poetry, is that part of grieving process and thereby the healing from the death of your mother, or that grieving process, does the poetry help in that process? I mean, uh, when you are earning for a mental well-being, writing poetry, will that help you? Uh, because there are very dispassionate imageries captured in poems like the fridge or the parrot crow, and whereas you have brought in very vivid memories about your mother in the hospital rainbow or in the hospital rainbow. So my question is, does poetry play a role in that grieving process? I think we lost him, Arjun. Uh, Sorry, all. I think Arjun has lost the connection. We'll wait for a while.
Maybe it's his connection, and maybe you should let him know that
Yeah,
he'll know, right? Because he'll get logged out. Is he speaking from Scotland?
no.
It's over, the fellowship.
Fellowship is over.
People in the audience, did you read the poems of Arjun Rajendran? A lot of contemporary poets have reflected on his poems and written about his poems. And people who get the Charles Wallace Fellowship and East Anglia Fellowship, etc., they really come out after that. I have great hopes in Arjun being there in our syllabi very soon. There is a link that I had shared of 6 of his poems from India Cultural Forum. I'll share it in the chat box if
Arjun is doing some network issue. He's logging in from his phone.
Okay,
actually,
okay.
Charles Wallace Fellowship fellow in 2018.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so he did. He was the Charles Wallace Fellow for Creative Writing at the University of Stirling, Scotland, in 18. So I think we'll talk about this later on in our conversation.
Right.
But then the range of poems, all the participants, if you can go through the work, the links that you have shared, you'll be amazed by the topics that he brings into this.
True.
Yeah. So one of the poem that actually that's one of my personal favorite is interviewing a beetroot. That's why we have titled the conversation as giving a beetroot a chance. So that's about a very ordinary thing of interviewing a beetroot. The absurdity, as he just now said, the absurdity of life. It's about the absurdity and of interviews. But then later on, that poem evolves into something very political, very powerfully political as it ends. So
Yeah, he's back.
So I usually recommend that you should all go through the poems. I was bowled over by the range of topics that he brings into it.
Arjun, we were praising you behind your back.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm trying to turn on the video. I'm not sure why the.
Many of our people in the audience are students. They want to know about the fellowship and other fellowships. Many are poets who want to know how to develop their careers. Will you please talk to them about it as well?
Yeah. Can you see my video, or it's
Can't
yeah.
see you. Can hear you. You're audible.
Okay. No.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Where were we? Sorry. We were in that.
We were talking about the transformation of personal memories into poetry. The different ways in which you address memory in your poetry, from very dispassionate imageries in the poems like the fridge or the parrot crow, to very vivid personal memories, like as in the hospital rainbow. So the question that the doubt that I had in mind is whether poems are part of the grieving process and help you in the well-being.
These poems which you're talking about, Fridge and Hospital Rainbow and all of that, these are a series of poems I'm currently working on my mother, who passed away in 2022. So, did it help me in my grieving process? I would like to say wanted to help me. I'm writing it to give it to some sort of. It's like your grief is air and you're walking on air, but you're trying to find something solid to hold on to. And when you're reading these sorts of things and memories, you feel that you're somehow you're speaking to your mother in the afterlife. And for someone who does not really, who's an atheist, who by belief, this is the closest I can come to prayer, the closest I can come to communicating with my mother. And that's why these poems are, I think they're very significant for me in the grieving process. But memory has played a role in almost all my work, even even in the earlier poems, like I mentioned, but that's
okay. So when your connection was lost, Kalani was explaining your work to the students, and they are all English students, and some of them are poets by themselves. So we would like to know more about the Charles Walls Fellowship that you had in 2018. So because what we are trying to do at Valad, especially through this India Writes Back series, is to how to introduce our students to possibilities of using English as a career option, as something they can flourish into a full-fledged career. So they would be interested in knowing more about the Charles Wallace Fellowship. That you had this fellowship in 2018, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So can you just explain that process or the nature of the fellowship also for the benefit of students?
Yeah, of course. It's a wonderful fellowship. First of all, it's provided by the British Council. Yeah, and Charles Wallace is called the Charles Wallace India Fellowship, and my fellowship was for creative writing, but there are fellowships also for translation. There are fellowships for for artistic projects, for museum curation, for restoration. So there's a whole lot of fellowships for artists. So it does not have to be writing specifically, but if you're talking about English, for writing itself, this fellowship is offered by two universities. One is the University of Stirling in Scotland, which was the university I chose, and the other university is the University of Kent. So both of these are in the UK. Yeah, I mean, of course, all of this is in the UK, but so this is a 3-month fellowship. Everything is paid for. You need to submit a statement of purpose, references, body of work, whether it's, they have a very broad spectrum of what creative writing means. So it can be nonfiction, it can be novel in progress, it can be short stories, it can be poetry. So it can be, this, you don't need to be limited to, one genre of creative writing as such. So they have it's the deadline is I think around September every year, but it could change. So I would advise you to check the website and follow all the guidelines very carefully, and it would help. Yeah, I mean, it would help if you have, from what I've seen, the successful applicants usually have one book out. But yeah, there could always be exceptions. Yeah, if you have a body of publications, that I think that will help.
Okay. Okay. So coming back to your poetry, you once mentioned that it's the content that decides the form of the poem. Whereas, like in interviewing a beetroot, you have a very playful tone all through. You have maintained a very playful tone, even though towards the end of the poem it becomes very powerfully political. Uh, the entire structure of interviewing a beetroot is very playful. Uh, on the other hand, in stanzas in Mary Gertrude resemble a bow and a stern of a ship. So when did you realize that the theme has decided a particular structure for your poem? Does it happen organically as you keep working on it? Because you mentioned right earlier in the conversation that while reading that manual or the diary, that poem suddenly came to you when you read about the deserter being executed. That poem already that came to you. So when you decide on when does it happen that you decide on the structure of the poem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it does happen organically for the most part. Like with interviewing a beetroot, when I got the title itself, I knew that it was just one short poem. It hardly took me 20 minutes to write it, and it just was one flow when it came through, and I could see that I was playing around with it in my mind, and it's how these silences, how these words, how these images, are inside your head, how they live in your head, and how you think of them, right? And it's this thinking and these spaces that you try to attempt to put on the page, and that's how the structure happens. So if there is a marriage, if there is a good marriage between the way you think and the way you write, this structure comes out as you would expect. And in the case of interviewing the beetroot poem, it was a very playful sort of structure, which, like you said, the content spoke to the structure. The content there had to be a certain sort of satire, correct? And I had to use those enjambments. I had to end those lines in those particular ways, and it's also the way you look at a poem, right? The visual appeal of the poem, and how the poem looks is it's of course as important as the words, the content of the poem itself. And and to me, there has to be a match between the two. There has to be a mirroring of content and structure. So that's a preoccupation in all my work. So like in Marie Gertrude, it just happened that way. Yeah, it did. It did resemble the bow and stern of a ship. I was quite surprised it turned out that way. I didn't make any alterations to make it fit that way later on. So yes, it is following your instinct. It is following the sounds in your head.
Okay. Then I read somewhere that you are working on a chapbook on death row counseling and alien abductions. I found that combination very interesting because they are apparently totally disconnected. Or are they connected in some way? Death row counseling and alien abduction.
Yeah, that would probably, I don't even know how to. My mother, when I would mention that work or read some of that work, I consider that as one poem. It's called Your Baby is Starving. And my mother would actually hold her head and she would almost weep when I would read that poem, because she thought it was nonsensical. She thought it was the worst. It was career suicide for me as a poet. And looking back, I don't know. I mean, if I'm very proud of it, or some people like it. A lot of people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just did what I could at the time. So I was going through a very, very tumultuous phase in my life. Right, I had rooted myself out of America, and I just come to India, and I was looking at all of it American culture from a different perspective, from a Orwellian standpoint. And I think it had been a couple of years, and I found out that there was this Indian who was sentenced to death row. He was the first Indian sentenced to death row. Was some Telugu guy, and he had murdered. He had tried to kidnap a baby, and then ended up murdering her and the baby's grandmother, who had tried to save her. So it is an absurdist chapbook. So I sort of it goes. I mean, it takes on the narrative that what if for some lesser sins, which the persona, which the narrating voice in that chapbook is talking about, like making bad tea, absurd things, not having a visa, and seeing a snake somewhere, and this being an omen, and for these reasons he gets into death row instead of the person who went to death row for kidnapping and for murder. So it's a sort of absurd. Yeah, it's an absurdist prose poem, I would say. Yeah.
So why that chapbook style?
I can't hear you, Anand.
Why that chapbook style?
Hello?
Hello?
I'm afraid.
Am I audible now?
Are you muted?
No, I'm. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
So why that chapbook? The style. Why did you opt for a chapbook for this particular theme?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this was part of a chapbook project called 5 with 4 other poets. Manjari Indurkar, Nandini Dar, Meher Vatsa, and Usha Akela. They are the other 4 poets. So we had to come up with a chapbook. We were all working collaboratively to come up with a chapbook, and we were reading each other's works, and we were giving feedback and things like that. So it had to be a chapbook format. So we'd already decided that it would be a chapbook format. So yeah.
Okay. So now it comes to your role as an editor. You have been editor for the Four Quarters magazine, which is no longer in print, and then the Bombay Literary magazine. So how conflicted or aligned is the poet in you with the editor in you? So when you're working on a poem, who gets the upper hand, the editor or the poet?
When I'm working on a poem, or when I'm reading a poem for
when you're working on a poem, because when you're reading a poem, definitely the editor will come into action. The editor will be there. But when you're working on a poem of your own, will the editor in you is the editor aligned with the process, or is in conflict with the process? So I'm just wondering whether how that works within you.
Not necessarily when I'm writing. The process of writing itself, when the poem is being birthed, then the editor in me takes a step back, and I do not allow too many obstacles to come between me and the process of writing and the creative process, so to speak. So I wear the editor's hat after I finish writing the poem, or when I'm putting together a collection together. That's when I become my own editor, and look back at the poem through as objective a lens as possible, which is quite difficult, to tell you the truth. That's why you need a community, you need good friends, you need other poets, you need another set of eyes. That's very important. But I have. That's when I become the editor. Look at the poem from a distance.
So as an editor, what are the factors that you, because as I told you earlier, many of our students are poets themselves, they want their work to be published. So as an editor, what is the advice that you can give, or as an editor, what are the qualities that you look for in a poem?
Yeah, there are quite a few, and I have talked about this before. So the first thing is if they want to be published, correct? Published where? Correct. Which publication, and why that publication? So first of all, for instance, if you're submitting to the Bombay Literary magazine, correct? The first thing you need to do is read the poems they published, or read the fiction they published if you want to publish fiction. Read every journal has a set of submission guidelines. Read those guidelines properly. Editors they receive hundreds to thousands of submissions. So if you do not follow guidelines, and if your submission is shabby, irrespective of your work being good, they will reject it. So at least follow this minimum, criteria. Try to, these very simple things like, your subject line, what you put in your subject line, your cover letter should be, in a particular format, your bio should be in a particular format. All these things are was important. And then of course the aesthetic of the journal. Does your work match the aesthetic of the journal? And they have particular themed issues. Is your work speaking to the themed issue? Is it a good fit? These are the questions you need to ask. And I would of course encourage anyone who's submitting or wanting to publish to read widely, and read across genres. Don't just, if you're writing poetry, don't just read poetry. Read fiction, read non-fiction, read newspapers, read anything you can get your hands on. Watch films. All these should speak to your art. Like, your art should be interdisciplinary, according to me. I mean, that's at least how I function. So follow the submission guidelines, read the journal, read their work. And one very important piece of advice I would give is that rejections are very, very common in this industry, right? You get hundreds of rejections and you might get 1 or 2 acceptances in a year. So don't be discouraged by rejections, right? It is, if you're afraid of rejections, don't submit, right? It's a part of the writing process. It's a part of growing as a writer. Sometimes editors come back with feedback, and those are the most valuable rejections. They tell you why they like the piece, but they cannot use it for a particular genre or a particular issue. And those are gold. Those are worth their weight in gold. They're extremely valuable. That sort of advice, and they'll help you, grow as a writer. So yeah, please.
Okay. Coming to out of your poetry, we are speaking about a larger social environment where we are right now going through a highly volatile environment where the transactional norms are being redefined, fast being redefined. So in this scenario, how reflective of the social psyche are poems? Can they be treated as mirrors held against the collective consciousness of the society, as once poetry and creative writing were considered, as they reflect the society? So can the poems that you see as an editor, or the poems that you create as a poet, are they mirrors held against the society, right?
Yes, definitely. I have there is, I think any good poem or any good poet would know that their art cannot, it has to be situated in a particular cultural, political, economic frame. It cannot be outside of it, right? So in that sense, all of the contemporary poetry that I've been reading is very, very reflective. It is whether it's talking about this particular political situation in India, or whether it's talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, whether it's talking about caste-based atrocities, like in poems like Gautam Megda's work and Chandramohan's work. These are very, very important mirrors to society, and they do present. That's why they say that I've read that poetry is the only art form that captures subjective truth in a very in such a condensed manner and in such a powerful manner. So it's those who have that gift, those who have that art. So it's so for me, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I think what I'm trying to say is that I think politics is entrenched in poetry. I don't think you can divorce the two. I don't think you can write in isolation of the social conditions you're living in. So I think any good poem is a reflection of that. So for instance, Interviewing a Beetroot is actually a very political poem, if you look at it. It's more than the play of it. It is a very political poem. And even in the Pondicherry poems, although it is set in a different period, some of the concerns I've addressed, especially the castes and the caste-based atrocities that are happening at that time, they're still happening today. So so I think yes, in that sense, yeah. The answer to your question is yes, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the why I asked this question is like that. This series, the India Writes Back series by Vallabh, is about subaltern voices that are not that easily visible in the mainstream, but then speaking about issues and topics that are or to push to the periphery of the preferences. So when you take up when new age poets or creative writers take up a theme that deserves to be highlighted, but then due to the socio-political constraints are being pushed to the peripheries. What are the challenges that you encounter as a creative writer when you take up such topics which are not essentially in the mainstream, uh, which essentially we basically call as subaltern voices?
The challenges. Well, I see. One is, of course, you are, particularly the state I live in. I live in Maharashtra, okay, where the government has a certain affiliation towards a certain kind of politics. There are certain people you cannot name. There are certain heroes they applaud. So if you talk, there's always a danger of a backlash happening. There is a poem I've written called "Were It Not For," about a statue of a particular emperor being built in the Arabian Sea, and the environmental destruction is going to cause. Luckily, nobody reads. I don't think anybody read. I mean, I don't think I have that many readers, or either that, or people don't get my work. I mean, it is couched in metaphors. Correct. So it's not very easy for a lot of people to understand my poem. They say that, I just can't understand what you're writing. It's just going above my, and that's a good thing for me. I don't, at least my approach is I don't approach it directly. So that's the way I handle these topics, so that, even entering it is a little difficult. So those who do enter it and comprehend it, they have enough brains to understand and not act as a threat to me personally. But I cannot say the same for other poets. I'm not sure if I have known poets who face death threats and all other kinds of. So there is always a risk when you're putting when you're saying something about an atrocity or something about a very polarized subject, and you're expressing it very strongly as a poet. And you're putting it out there. There is always risk of you don't know how some mad person is going to react to it. So that's one of the challenges. The other thing is doing justice to that subject itself in the poem, which I think is a greater challenge. Is there are a lot of topics which everybody wants to write about, like war or conflict or atrocities against minors. Whatever comes in the newspaper, whether it's someone being abused, or whether it's murder, or whether it's war. But these things are not, how do you make it your own so that it sounds authentic on the page? Just because it's current and it's political and it's fashionable to write about it, that does not mean that it's easy to write about it. And that, I think, is the way you maneuver through these challenges, right? Through these problems, through these challenges, and the way you understand it, the way you inhabit these situations, and then craft a poem out of it. I think that's the greater challenge in writing political poems or.
Okay. And then you once said that the freedom offered by internet has liberated the English poetry in India. Yes, there have been very bold experiments in content, style, language. But when compared to the Indian English writing of the past, how serious are our poets right now, today, about their art? As an editor, how do you find it?
See, again, I mean, out of let's say that there are, how serious, as in everybody is serious to publish. Everybody is serious about wanting to be the, wanting to be a big name, whatever it is. I mean, in poetry, I don't even know what it means to be a big name because, frankly, the value of poetry itself is. What I mean to say is that the limelight a poet gets is far lesser than other genres of writing, like the nonfiction or novelists or others. So why poetry in the first place, right? Why would you choose to write poetry in the first place is the question. But all I'm saying is everybody who wants to be out there and wants to publish does not really work to get that correct. There needs to be sort of there needs to be a lot of reading. There needs to be a lot of hard work. There needs to be a lot of sincerity, and it's very apparent to seasoned readers and editors when they read a particular work to see how much the poet has, how much the writer has understood their craft, how serious the poet is towards their art, and in this age of instant gratification, right, where things go viral like this just because certain keywords are used or anything like that. It is quite easy to be a popular poet, I think, at least temporarily. But to be a good poet, to be a consistently, to be a consistently good poet, I think that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of behind the scenes work. I think that takes a lot of reading. I think that takes a lot of self-criticism. And the majority of poets writing today, they're not ready for that. They're not ready for any sort of criticism. They just want instant fame, instant gratification. That's at least what that's what my impression is.
I think if audience, anyone has any questions right now, we can take the questions at this point. Because we have been covering a lot of areas from poems by Arjun and to his work as an editor and his philosophy on the art of writing. So if any of you have any questions, please feel free to raise the question. Arjun will take the questions now.
I was wondering whether you plan on writing prose or fiction, or is poetry your only destiny?
Yeah, so I have published one short story so far. I have tried my hand at a few more, but they're absolute rubbish. So I'm not very confident of my prose. But I maybe one day I might come up with something. But as of now, my primary vocation is poetry.
And straddling Kerala culture and Indian memories and US experience, do you plan on translations? Because a lot of contemporary poets do that. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and I'm totally jealous of them. I'm in awe of them. Poets are also translators because it's a rare gift. The way you think itself changes. It's a whole different challenge. I know so many wonderful poets who are brilliant translators, and unfortunately for me, my first language, or I would say, I don't know if my first language is English or Tamil, but my Tamil is not good enough for translation, and I do know French, but again, my French is also not up to translation levels at the moment.
You have written about yourself with friends, not pretending to be good at French. I read it in one of your poems.
Yeah, that was a very old, very old poem. Yeah, that was when I was starting off. Even now, I don't think I'm not nowhere near translation levels or native speaking levels, but I can read, fluently and yeah.
These days, a lot of poets take up some hybrid genre to bring in documentary style into poetry and pictures and paintings and a lot of experimentation like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I think that should happen. The more experimentation, pushing the limits. I think they should do whatever they feel like doing, and there should not be any.
Performance.
I have my reservations on that, but I will not talk about.
No, I wasn't talking
Yeah.
about you. I was talking about what poets do generally.
No. Yeah. I understand.
Maybe trying to give you some ideas regarding where you could go.
But then you
Yeah.
you have a tendency to capture absorb the culture, like the poem in Hotel Lobby, Sultan Ahmed Istanbul, where you say that like the poem says, we only remember places we are here to forget. But then you talk about people who are from different places, talking about places they belong to.
He doesn't forget.
Yeah, so that poem is very powerful. Actually, one of our participants have asked you to read out a poem of yours, a poem of your choice.
Oh wow. Okay. Uh, let me see. Just give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to read a poem called Igloo. Yeah, it's from my second book, The Cosmonaut Energies Rocket. Uh, this is actually a poem on climate change, right? So, Igloo. It was my father's idea to saw the ball in half, glue tidy cotton slabs like an intuitive Inuit. A tunnel of cardboard elongated the entrance, its tobacco Arjun still awake. I sat the igloo near a mosquito coil, affectioned it all night. In the rubber's darkness, my pretense admitted a lamp slowly burning whale oil. I carry my daughter into its light, show her the blood glistening on the spear's tip. We are among the last families. As we are waiting to drown, I wish to see her take an igloo to school, win the first prize. A pencil box, maybe even a cycle. It'll overwhelm her to approach that sunny dais and claim her triumph.
So that is Igloo for Shivagami Vidyangiri. She asked for the poem. So Shivagami, this is Igloo from Rajendran. Anyone else? Do you have any questions for him?
Meghna has sent me a question.
Okay.
Ma'am, you were telling us that he's good at capturing the emotions in poetry. Could you ask him what emotions he finds hardest to capture in words?
Wow. I would say anything, any emotion you take up. It's be it romantic feelings or be it anger. I think all these emotions present their own challenges, and I think the poet's particular difficulty is in being able to bring those emotions in a way that is not overly sentimental, overly sugary, and still being able to convey, the depth of that emotion. I think the depth of emotion, whatever emotion it might be, and of course, poets as human beings, we have a range of emotions, correct? I mean, it's whatever you take up, each of it. I mean, each is challenging. I think everything is equally challenging. I think there's no one emotion that's more challenging than the other. .
Okay. So, there are no other questions. Kalyani, I think we can. Yeah. No, somebody has raised a hand. No. Okay. I think there are no more questions. So, Arjun, thank you very much. It was a wonderful journey that you took us through, your poems, your idea of poetry, your response towards the world around you. You gave us a lot of information about the scholarship and creative writing. And as an editor's perspective, from an editor's perspective, how to approach publishing our creative works. So this will be hugely helpful for our students. So we do look forward to your guidance in future. We'll be reaching out to you. We can have more sessions with you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you, Anand, thank you, Kalyani. Thank you so much for having me, and it was a pleasure. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
All the best. All the best.
You.
Thank you.
We are ending this.